In the hills near modern Masvingo, in southeastern Zimbabwe, stand the remains of a city that forces us to rethink the history of southern Africa. Great Zimbabwe was not a small village, a lonely shrine, or a random pile of ruins. It was a major urban and political center, spread across more than 7 square kilometers, with massive stone walls, elite compounds, open spaces, and evidence of a society capable of organizing people, labor, resources, and authority over centuries. Settled from around 1000 CE, it later became the capital of the Kingdom of Great Zimbabwe. Its scale alone is striking, but its real importance is deeper. Great Zimbabwe shows that powerful states, monumental architecture, and sophisticated social systems existed in the African interior long before European colonial rule. The rise of Great Zimbabwe did not happen overnight. The site began as a settlement around the start of the second millennium, then grew in importance as communities developed around cattle, farming, craft production, and regional exchange. Its location mattered. The surrounding highlands offered useful land and access to routes that connected inland societies with wider networks. By the 13th century, Great Zimbabwe had become the center of a kingdom whose influence may have covered around 50,000 square kilometers. That influence was not simply about controlling territory on a map. It likely involved tribute, alliances, ritual authority, control of valuable goods, and the ability to bring people together around a powerful royal center. The city's growth reflects a long process of social and political consolidation. The name Great Zimbabwe also tells part of the story. Zimbabwe is commonly linked to the idea of stone houses or houses of stone. The word great distinguishes this site from hundreds of smaller stone ruins, often also called Zimbabwes, found across the Zimbabwe Highveld and beyond. More than 400 related sites have been identified in southern Africa, including places in Zimbabwe and Mozambique. This means Great Zimbabwe was not an isolated miracle. It was the largest and most famous example of a broader architectural tradition. The builders were working within a regional world where stone walls could express rank, authority, sacredness, and identity. Great Zimbabwe stands out because it took that tradition to an extraordinary scale. The city is usually divided into 3 major areas: the Hill Complex, the Valley Complex, and the Great Enclosure. These zones were constructed and used at different times, which is why scholars still debate their exact functions. The Hill Complex rises among natural granite formations, giving it a dramatic and elevated presence. The Valley Complex includes remains of settlements and enclosures below. The Great Enclosure is the most famous architectural feature, with its huge curving walls and internal structures. Rather than imagining Great Zimbabwe as one building with one simple purpose, it is better to see it as a changing urban landscape. Different parts of the city may have served royal, residential, ritual, administrative, and public functions as power shifted over generations. The Great Enclosure is the structure that most clearly communicates the ambition of the city. Built mainly during the 13th and 14th centuries, its dry stone walls rise up to about 11 meters high in places. Dry stone construction means the walls were built without mortar. No cement held the stones together. Stability came from careful selection, shaping, stacking, weight, and balance. This required planning, skilled labor, and an understanding of how stone behaves over time. The wall's height and smooth curves were not just practical. They created a sense of separation and prestige. Many archaeologists think the Great Enclosure likely served as a royal residence, while also containing spaces that may have been used for ritual or public ceremonies. Population estimates for Great Zimbabwe have changed as research methods have improved. Older estimates sometimes suggested a peak population of around 20,000 people. More recent work, using archaeological, historical, ethnographic, and statistical evidence, suggests the population may not have exceeded 10,000. That lower estimate should not be misunderstood as making the city less impressive. In its regional and medieval context, a settlement of several thousand people was still a major center. Population is only one measure of importance. Great Zimbabwe mattered because it concentrated power, wealth, symbolism, and specialized activity. It was a capital, a place where political authority could be seen in stone, where elites could live apart, and where surrounding communities could recognize the center of a wider state. The builders of Great Zimbabwe were ancestors of the Shona people, whose descendants live in Zimbabwe and neighboring countries today. This fact is essential because it was once aggressively denied. In the colonial period, many European writers and antiquarians refused to believe that black Africans could have built such a complex stone city. Instead, they invented foreign origins, attributing the ruins to outsiders from distant civilizations. These theories were not based on better evidence. They reflected racial assumptions. If Great Zimbabwe had been built by Africans, then colonial claims about African societies being incapable of high civilization collapsed. The site therefore became more than an archaeological question. It became a battleground over who was allowed to have history, achievement, and intellectual dignity. European visits to Great Zimbabwe are confirmed from the late 19th century, and investigations began in 1871. But much of the early outside attention was destructive. Between the 1890s and the 1920s, European antiquarians looted Great Zimbabwe and surrounding sites. This caused lasting damage because archaeology depends on context. An object is not only important because of what it is, but because of where it was found, what layer it came from, and what other material surrounded it. When items are removed carelessly, the story becomes harder to reconstruct. Looting did not just steal objects. It stole relationships between evidence. That loss still affects what can be known about the city's daily life, ritual practices, economy, and political organization. Under white minority rule in Rhodesia, the interpretation of Great Zimbabwe became intensely political. Archaeologists and historians faced pressure to deny or minimize the African origin of the site. This was because the ruins directly challenged the ideology of colonial rule. A massive African-built city, created centuries before colonization, made racist narratives look absurd. By the 1950s, however, the African origin of Great Zimbabwe had become the scholarly consensus. That consensus mattered. It restored the city to the people whose ancestors built it and corrected a deliberate distortion of the past. Great Zimbabwe showed that historical truth is not just about dates and stones. It can also expose the political motives behind false stories. Even with decades of research, Great Zimbabwe still holds mysteries. Scholars do not fully agree on the functions of each complex. Some interpret the hill complex, valley complex, and great enclosure as elite residences used in different periods. Others argue that they served distinct ritual, political, or social purposes. This disagreement is not a failure of archaeology. It reflects the difficulty of studying a living city through surviving material remains. Walls can show boundaries, movement, and hierarchy, but they do not always explain exactly what people believed or how ceremonies worked. The most responsible interpretation accepts both evidence and uncertainty. Great Zimbabwe was probably many things at once: a capital, a royal landscape, a ritual center, and a symbol of authority. By the 15th century, major construction at Great Zimbabwe had slowed, and by the 16th or 17th century, the city was abandoned. Abandonment does not necessarily mean sudden disaster. Cities often decline when political centers shift, trade routes change, resources come under pressure, or ruling networks lose their ability to hold people together. The people connected to Great Zimbabwe did not simply disappear. Communities, traditions, and political life continued elsewhere. What ended was the city's role as the dominant center of the region. Its walls remained as evidence of a former concentration of power. Like many great capitals, Great Zimbabwe reminds us that urban success depends on changing conditions, and even the strongest centers can eventually lose their purpose. Today, Great Zimbabwe is recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the most important symbols of Zimbabwean identity. The modern nation takes its name from the city, transforming a place once misrepresented by colonial writers into a national emblem of African achievement. Its significance goes beyond architecture. Great Zimbabwe challenges narrow versions of world history that focus only on Europe, the Mediterranean, or Asia when discussing medieval complexity. Here, in southern Africa, people built monumental stone structures, organized a powerful kingdom, shaped a regional political landscape, and left behind a legacy strong enough to survive denial, looting, and distortion. The ruins are silent, but their message is clear: history is much larger than the story's power once allowed to be told. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.